On a stormy night, a nurse jumped into the river to save a drowning patient and came face to face with a crocodile. What seemed like a deadly attack became the beginning of a mystery. 24 hours later, that same monster would do something even more incredible, changing the village's story forever. The night had fallen over the riverside hospital like a heavy, wet curtain. Outside, the sky twisted with lightning that lit up the foggy windows. The wind made the metal roof shake, and the river, the brown river that never slept, began to rise with a worrying sound. The radio speakers, hanging in the guard room, repeated the storm warning now and then, but the words felt distant, like they came from another world. Inside the hospital, the hall smelled of disinfectant mixed with damp air, and the fluorescent lights flickered unevenly. Lucia, the nurse on duty, tried to focus on checking the patient's charts. Her fingers were cold, even though she wore a light jacket over her uniform. She kept glancing at the wall clock and felt that time moved slower when the storm surrounded the building. The rain's steady murmur on the metal roof mixed with the dripping from clogged gutters. Outside, trees bent in the wind, and the dock posts seemed to sink deeper with every wave. She had worked through hard nights before, nights of fever, urgent births, and accidents on the muddy road. But this night felt different. It wasn't just her tiredness or the endless rain. It was something else, a feeling she couldn't name. Every time she looked out the window toward the shore, she felt like the river was breathing, like something in its murky water was awake and watching. She pushed her hair behind her ear and tried to laugh at herself. "I'm letting the storm get to me," she whispered, though the laugh was lost in the empty hallway. She squeezed her stethoscope tight in her hands, as if the cold metal could give her strength. The hospital was half empty at that hour. In the emergency room, only 2 patients slept under the care of an assistant. The rest of the staff stayed in the dining room, trying to heat coffee in an old pot. Lucia chose to remain near the entrance, as if keeping silent guard against whatever might come from the river. The sound of water hitting the dock piles was clear whenever the wind pushed the loose doors. She had grown up there, knew the rhythm of the delta. Yet that night the river's pulse felt too close, too strong. She bit her lip as she remembered the floods of her childhood, when water had erased the streets and houses floated like broken boats. She closed her eyes for a second, and the image came back. An overturned boat, drowning cries, and a rescue that never came in time. She shook her head to push away the memory, but the tightness in her chest stayed. A thunderclap shook the windows, and the radio gave another report. Electric storm across the whole basin. Caution is advised at docks and rural roads. Possible flooding in the next hours. Lucia turned the volume up, though no one else was listening. The metallic voice filled the room, confirming what she already knew. Danger was closer than anyone wanted to admit. She stood up and walked to the glass door that opened onto the dock. Outside, the rain drew diagonal lines in the air, and sometimes lightning revealed the foamy surface of the river. For a moment she swore she saw something moving in the water, an elongated shape quickly disappearing under the current. She blinked several times and rested her forehead on the cold glass. "I'm just tired, that's all," she told herself, though a shiver ran down her back. The clock struck 2 in the morning when she sat down again. She opened the guard notebook and tried to write the routine report, but the ink spread with the humidity. Her pulse raced, as if she expected the door to open by itself and something to blow in with the wind. She didn't know this feeling was only the beginning, the first signal of events that would change the town's history and her own life. For now, she only knew one thing for sure. Something was lurking in the darkness of the river, and that certainty would not let her sleep. The screech of the hinges cut through the silence of the hallway. The hospital door burst open, pushed by a blast of cold wind and rain. Lucia jumped to her feet, the notebook slipping from her knees and falling to the floor. A staggering figure came in, soaked to the bone, clothes stuck to his body, his face twisted with fear. "Help?" the man stammered, his voice broken. "It's going to sink. It's going to sink again." Lucia reacted right away. She ran to him and caught him before he collapsed. The man was gasping, his eyes wide, his skin freezing cold. He smelled strongly of the river, of mud and fresh algae. "Calm down. You're inside now," she said, trying to sound firm as she guided him to a nearby stretcher. "Breathe, you're safe." But the man couldn't calm down. His hands shook so badly he couldn't hold himself up. Lucia called the assistant nurse, and together they settled him on the stretcher. The stranger kept muttering broken phrases. The doc, the eyes underneath watching. His body jerked with spasms of fear. Lucia checked his pulse and found it racing, as if he had run for kilometers. "What's your name?" she asked, leaning close to meet his eyes. The man swallowed with effort. Finally, he managed to say, "Samuel." Lucia nodded, repeating his name softly to remember it. As she placed a dry blanket over his shoulders, she noticed scratches on his arms, as if he had fought against branches or rocks. "Samuel, listen," she said slowly. "You're safe. You're in the hospital. We're going to help you." But he kept shaking his head again and again. His breathing broke into sobs, and he pointed toward the door, toward the dock hidden under the curtain of rain. The eyes, they were there, under the boards, staring. "They wouldn't let me go. I saw them." A chill ran down Lucia's back. She remembered the strange shape she thought she'd seen in the river minutes earlier. She tried to push the idea away, but Samuel's words were too exact, too full of terror. The assistant brought a blood pressure monitor, and Lucia asked her to hold him steady while she checked. His pressure was high, his heart flooded with fear. She prepared a light sedative, but hesitated. She didn't want to silence him before she understood what had happened. "Samuel, tell me," she whispered. "What were you doing at the dock at this hour?" He squeezed his eyes shut and curled under the blanket. It took him a moment to answer. "I heard a hit on the boards. I thought it was a log, but it wasn't. Something moved below. When I looked, those yellow eyes were waiting for me." Lucia swallowed hard. The word eyes hung in the air like an echo. She tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a reflection or the shine of a distant lamp. But Samuel seemed sure of what he saw, and the fear in his face was too real. A thunderclap shook the roof. Samuel trembled and tried to sit up, but she held him back so he wouldn't hurt himself. "It's over," she said, with a calm she didn't feel. "You're not going back to the dock now." He looked at her in despair. "It wasn't a log, it wasn't a shadow. It was waiting for me." The assistant exchanged a worried look with Lucia. At that moment, the radio filled with static, as if the storm wanted to underline the man's testimony. Lucia thought about calling the doctor on duty right away, but something stopped her. She didn't want to sound alarmist or throw everyone into panic over what could just be a hallucination. Still, she couldn't ignore the coincidence. She too had felt the river's presence, as if it breathed with its own intentions. Samuel, exhausted, began to sob. He clutched the blanket like he feared being dragged away again. Between gasps he repeated, "It's under there. It's still there, waiting for us." Lucia touched his shoulder gently. "Rest, Samuel. You're not alone." She watched him close his eyes, his eyelids still trembling. And she knew then this would not be just another night. The river was sending signals, and now there was a witness who gave words to what she had only dared to feel. The early morning moved on in silence, broken only by the sound of rain. Samuel, now lying on the stretcher, seemed to doze under the effect of the sedative, though from time to time he murmured confused words. Lucia stayed close, never taking her eyes off him, as if she feared that when he woke he would repeat those words. The eyes under the dock. A couple of hours later, When the storm grew less violent and the rain turned into a softer tapping, the first fishermen arrived at the hospital guard room. They came soaked, carrying battery lanterns in their hands, their clothes full of the river's smell. They weren't looking for medical care, only shelter. One of them, a man with a thick beard and a straw hat bent by the damp, greeted with a serious gesture and asked in a low voice, "Is it true, nurse?" Lucia stiffened. "What do they say?" The fisherman looked at his companions before answering. That someone saw the old crocodile again. The assistant nurse, who was arranging bandages, looked up with curiosity. Lucia tried to sound indifferent. "I don't know what you're talking about." But the man insisted, lowering his voice even more, as if afraid someone outside the walls might hear. "That animal isn't like the others. It's been after the people of this town for years. It learns fast. It knows where to wait. It even seems to recognize the sound of ambulance sirens." A chill ran through Lucia. She remembered the way Samuel had stumbled into the hospital, and how he had described those yellow eyes. The fishermen settled in the hallway, shaking off the water. One lit his lantern and placed it on a table, casting long shadows across the walls. Then they began to share their stories in low voices, as if they were around a campfire instead of inside a hospital. One said that weeks earlier, he had seen a massive shadow slide beside his boat just when an ambulance siren passed the dock. Another told how, at nightfall, when the dock lanterns went out, he heard heavy splashes, unlike any log carried by the current. "It's not a normal animal," said the bearded man. "That beast has learned to wait when people are most distracted. I've seen it stay still, under the boards, as if it knew someone would pass close sooner or later." Lucia didn't want to feed the collective fear, but she couldn't deny the coincidence. The memory of the dark shape in the river still struck her mind. From the stretcher, Samuel moaned in his sleep. "The eyes, they're there. They won't let me go." Silence took over. The fishermen exchanged worried looks. One crossed himself, another muttered a quick prayer. Outside, the river kept roaring under the wind. Lucia decided to step in. "What we need is calm," she said firmly. "No one will solve anything if we let fear control us." The bearded fisherman shook his head. "Fear is there because the river never lies. And when someone sees it, it means they're already marked." His words hung heavy, like the mud dragged by the current. Lucia pressed her lips together. She didn't want to believe in superstitions, but a part of her understood the weight of those stories. Since she was a child, she had heard tales of creatures living in the waters, but she had always kept them in the world of scary bedtime stories. Now, with Samuel trembling on the stretcher, everything felt different. The lanterns flickered at the same time as a new thunderclap shook the air. The men pulled their jackets tighter and spoke of organizing to check the dock at dawn. "We can't leave it down there waiting," said one. "That animal knows too much," added another. Lucia listened without joining in. She only checked Samuel's pulse and watched the faint lantern light project wavering figures against the wall, shapes that looked like crawling reptiles. Inside her, something was growing, a mix of fear and responsibility. She couldn't deny what she had heard. The river kept secrets, and the rumors of the delta might be a reflection of a truth bigger than anyone was ready to accept. The fishermen's murmurs faded as tiredness took over. Some fell asleep on the hallway chairs, their lanterns resting on the floor, their boots still dripping mud. Samuel breathed more calmly now, though from time to time his body shook with a brief spasm. The assistant had stepped away to make coffee, and Lucia was left alone in the guard room, wrapped in a silence broken only by the water pounding against the dock piles. She looked around, the long shadows, the foggy windows, the radio crackling non-stop. Everything seemed to conspire to bring her memories back. She ran a hand over her forehead, as if to chase away her exhaustion, but instead, an old image rose, the one she had buried for years. The memory didn't begin with a sound, but with a smell, wet mud mixed with soaked wood. She had been 8 years old when the great flood struck the town. That morning she woke to the sound of water entering through the front door. Her mother's screams and the neighbors' shouts still echoed in her mind. They had climbed onto the roofs, looking for height, while the river swallowed streets and yards. Lucia saw herself again on that tilted rooftop, her feet cold, her heart racing. From above, she watched the rescue boats go back and forth, carrying whole families. But not everyone was saved. One boat, too full, flipped over just a few meters away. The water filled with bodies thrashing for life. Among them, a small boy, her cousin, only a bit older than her, called her name, begging for help. Lucia had wanted to jump, but her mother held her tight. "No," she shouted. "You'll drown." The boy kicked for a few more seconds before the current pulled him away, lost in the dark water. That image stayed, like an invisible scar. They searched for him for hours that night, but he never came back. The river didn't return his body, and since then every flood carried the same reminder. The water keeps what it takes. Lucia touched, almost without thinking, the small scar on her leg. A reminder of that same flood, when a loose metal sheet cut her as they escaped. The mark always reminded her she had survived, but also what she had lost. She never spoke openly of the fear that rooted in her chest. She had learned to swim, yes, but each time she approached the water, something inside her tightened, as if the river could still recognize her. Now, while Samuel slept with fear still etched on his face, she understood it wasn't just nerves. The water had marked her life long before this night shift. Maybe that was why she felt the presence before anyone said it aloud. Maybe the river had been watching her all along. The thud of a branch against the dock planks pulled her back to the present. She stood and looked out the window. The current dragged logs and debris, reminding her that danger wasn't just in rumors. The old crocodile, the fisherman had said. She thought of her lost cousin, of how the river could swallow a life without warning. She hugged herself, trying to chase away the cold creeping up her back. She wondered if Samuel had really seen what he claimed, or if, like her, he was being consumed by his own memories. The assistant returned with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Looks like things calmed down a bit," she said. Lucia forced a smile, taking the warm cup. "Yes," she answered. "A bit." But she knew it wasn't true. Inside her, something had awakened, and it wasn't the storm. It was the weight of an old wound that had never healed, a fear she had never spoken out loud, but that now demanded her attention. As she sipped the coffee, she looked again at Samuel and the sleeping fisherman. A certainty crossed her mind. The river doesn't forget, and neither did she. The early morning no longer seemed to move forward, as if the clock had stopped at a gray point between storm and calm. Outside, the river kept rising with a steady murmur. Lucia tried to focus on the present, but the image of her cousin dragged away by the current would not leave her. The memory was so vivid that, for a moment, she thought she heard his voice inside the roar of the water. The sound of an ambulance engine broke the tension. The assistant came running down the hall. "A call just came in," she announced. "We have to transfer Mrs. Velasquez to the Central Hospital. Her blood pressure spiked, and they don't want to take risks." Lucia placed the empty cup on the table and adjusted her jacket. Night transfers weren't unusual, but in the middle of the storm, the thought made her uneasy. She walked to the stretcher, where the elderly woman waited, her face pale, her breathing unsteady. "You're going to be fine," Lucia told her softly. "We'll take you in the guard boat to the ambulance waiting on the other shore." 2 orderlies arrived to help. The plan was simple. Move down the hall to the dock, place the patient on the portable stretcher, and load her onto the boat. It all had to be quick, before the rain grew worse. But when they opened the door to the dock, They realized the problem. The dock lights were out, maybe from a power cut. Outside, darkness was almost total, broken only by lightning that flashed long shadows over the water. "You can't see a thing," one of the orderlies muttered. Lucia felt a knot in her stomach. She remembered the fishermen's rumors, the eyes under the boards. She tried to push those images away and focus on the urgent task. The patient needed to get out. "Get the flashlights," she ordered firmly. The beams of light created an uneven path, projecting strange shapes across the wet walls. The shadows seemed to move on their own, as if the night itself was breathing beside them. The portable stretcher squeaked as they unfolded it. Carefully, they lifted Mrs. Velasquez and began down the hall toward the dock. The wind rushed in, blowing out the weaker flashlights. The group stopped every few steps, readjusting the load. The water hit the planks with stronger rhythm. Lucia felt her heart pounding in her chest, forcing herself to look straight ahead and not to the sides. At one point, her flashlight lit the end of the dock. The water level looked higher than usual, covering part of the piles. The river was overflowing with hidden fury. The shadows of fallen trees stretched out like arms trying to grab them. "Hurry," said Lucia, trying to sound calmer than she really was. The group picked up speed, but the portable stretcher shook in the wind. One of the orderlies stumbled, and his light fell, rolling toward the edge before going out. The silence grew heavier than it should have, as if the river itself had stopped breathing. Lucia took a deep breath and gripped her flashlight tighter. She had to stay calm. She couldn't let fear freeze her. But for an instant, she felt the same as hours earlier. The certainty that something was watching them from the water, still and patient. Mrs. Velasquez moaned, barely conscious, unaware of the invisible danger around them. Lucia stroked her forehead to calm her, though her own hand trembled. When they reached the dock's edge, a flash of lightning revealed the outline of the boat tied up. The vessel slammed against the piles, as if it too was fighting the river. "We're almost there," Lucia whispered, more to herself than to the others. The orderlies prepared to lower the stretcher into the boat, but the wind hit again, ripping up part of the dock's cover and plunging them into deeper shadows. The flashlights lit only a few meters ahead, and beyond that was nothing but liquid darkness. Lucia swallowed hard. The scene was repeating itself. A transfer in the middle of a flood, long shadows, water hiding more than it showed. The difference now was that she was the one in charge. She felt her childhood fear shouting for her to turn back, to stay away from the river. But she also knew that if she gave in, the patient's life would be at risk. So she took a breath and gave the order. "Careful now. Lower her down." And as the stretcher descended toward the boat, the river roared as if answering her decision. The air changed suddenly, as if the river had decided to breathe harder. A violent gust swept across the dock, lifting the water into a sideways rain. One orderly's flashlight went out instantly, leaving only two weak beams trembling like candles. Lucia clenched her teeth and gripped the portable stretcher, holding Mrs. Velasquez with both hands. The wind shook it like a piece of paper. The men struggled to keep it steady, but every step toward the boat was a huge effort. The dock groaned, complaining under the weight of the river and the storm. "Hold her tight," Lucia shouted, though the wind dragged her voice away. Then another stronger gust hit them from the side. The tarp covering part of the dock tore free and flew off, striking one orderly in the face. He let go of his end of the stretcher, and the balance broke. The patient's body tilted dangerously toward the water. Lucia reacted at once, lunging to grab the other end. The stretcher's cold metal burned her hands, but she managed to straighten it just before it fell. Still, the force of the wind pushed them back several steps. The dock seemed to tilt under them. Mrs. Velasquez moaned, confused, but in the chaos an unexpected shadow moved among the patients in the hall. "Samuel," He had woken, disoriented, his eyes lost. Without anyone stopping him, he rose from his bed and staggered toward the dock. Lucia saw him for only a second, but her heart froze. Samuel walked like a sleepwalker, muttering words twisted by the storm. His arms stretched out, as if trying to embrace the rain. "Samuel, no!" she cried, but the storm swallowed her voice. He kept going, slipping past the orderlies without meaning to. One tried to hold him back, but Samuel pulled away with a clumsy shove. His bare feet slid on the wet wood, yet he moved forward, guided by something unseen. The flashlights caught his face, eyes wide open, lips repeating the same words over and over. "Under the eyes, they're calling me." Lucia let go of the stretcher to run after him, but it was too late. Samuel reached the edge of the dock, just as a new gust shook everything. The planks vibrated like a drum, and in a sudden motion, he lost his balance. The silence after was unreal. Only the sound of his body hitting the water. A splash, then nothing. The river swallowed him as if it had been waiting all along. Lucia reached the edge, gasping, her flashlight shaking in her hand. She lit the surface, but only saw ripples spreading in circles, quickly devoured by the current. No bubbles, no arm, no cry for help. The water had taken him in absolute silence. For a moment, everyone stood frozen. The orderlies, pale, still clutched the stretcher with Mrs. Velasquez. The assistant came running from inside, her face twisted with shock. "What happened?" she asked, though the answer was clear. Lucia couldn't reply. Her throat was tight, her mind repeating the same question. How could he vanish so quickly? She looked out into the dark river, waiting for a sign, but all it gave back was the flickering reflection of lightning. The wind kept howling, uncaring. The patient coughed weakly, reminding them another life still needed saving. Lucia forced herself to step away from the edge and return, though her legs shook. With effort, they finally lowered Mrs. Velasquez into the boat. The motor roared, and the vessel pulled away with difficulty, swallowed by the short waves of the storm. Lucia stayed on the dock a moment longer, soaked, her heart racing. She knew someone would have to report Samuel, but inside she sensed something worse. This was no ordinary accident. The river hadn't just taken him. It had claimed him. The silence after Samuel's fall lasted only a second. Then came the screams. The assistant let out a cry. The orderlies shouted his name in panic, and one fisherman who had stayed in the hall ran to the dock with his lantern raised. The beam shook, drawing erratic circles over the dark water. Lucia felt her blood pounding in her ears. Her whole body shook. She didn't know if from the storm's cold or from the certainty that Samuel was still down there, fighting against something they couldn't see. She stared at the river, at the ripples still widening where he had fallen. A flash of bubbles appeared for an instant, and it was enough. "He sank," one orderly shouted, frozen in place. Lucia didn't wait for orders, didn't think about protocols. Her body moved before reason could stop her. She threw her flashlight down, kicked off her shoes, and in one desperate leap, she dove into the freezing water. The shock was brutal. The cold stabbed through her like a knife, stealing her breath. The water surrounded her, thick with mud and branches. She opened her eyes underwater, but the darkness was almost complete. Only the faint glow of lanterns above trembled like distant stars. She kicked hard, following the broken line of bubbles rising. She didn't think about what could be down there, or about the rumors of yellow eyes. She only thought about Samuel, about not repeating the failed rescue of her childhood. This time, she would not let him disappear. Her lungs burned as she went deeper. The current struck her sideways, slamming her into the piles. A splinter scraped her arm, but she didn't stop. She reached out blindly into the blackness. Suddenly, her fingers touched fabric. She grabbed tight. It was Samuel's shoulder. He thrashed like a rag doll in the water. Lucia pulled him toward her and tried to push upward, but the weight was greater than she expected. The river seemed to be sucking them down. Above, she could faintly hear shouting and saw lanterns moving wildly along the dock. A rope splashed into the water, but too far, swinging in the current. She knew it wouldn't reach them in time unless she acted now. Samuel opened his eyes under the water. What Lucia saw froze her. It wasn't pure terror. There was something else, as if instead of escaping, he was answering a call. His lips bubbled words she couldn't hear, and then the current pulled him lower. Lucia fought back with fury, holding him tighter. She kicked with all her strength, slamming into something hard. Maybe a log, maybe something else. The river vibrated around them, as if it breathed. With one final effort, she pushed them upward, dragging Samuel with her. They broke the surface in a violent splash, and air filled her lungs like fire. She shouted his name, making sure he was still conscious. Samuel coughed hard, spitting water, but didn't answer. On the dock, lanterns searched for them. Another rope dropped close by. Lucia reached for it, but at that exact moment, she felt a sharp pull on her leg. Something heavy, something alive, was dragging her down. "No!" she cried, just before sinking again. Voices on the dock multiplied in desperation. Lanterns shook harder, as if they too were afraid. Underwater again, Lucia pressed Samuel to her chest and kicked upward. Her mind repeated one single phrase: "I won't lose him. Not again." The river roared around her, uncaring of her promise. The water wrapped around her with a burning cold. Lucia sank out of control, dragged down by something gripping her leg like an invisible claw. She held Samuel tight, trying to keep him close, but the current pulled them apart little by little. The scream she had let out on the surface was already a memory. Now everything was liquid silence, so thick it felt like it could bite. She forced her eyes open, but the river was only a dark, oily mass. The lanterns on the dock barely gave off faint yellow flashes, twisted by the waves. In the middle of that gloom, she felt it, a deep vibration, like a muffled roar moving through the water. It wasn't the river's sound or logs colliding. It was something else, a living pulse spreading in invisible waves. Her heart pounded in her ears, beating in rhythm with that strange vibration. Each second stretched, as if time under the water obeyed different rules. She knew she had to reach the surface before her breath gave out, but the force holding her leg wouldn't let go. Suddenly, a shadow moved in front of her. Huge, rolling, like a wall gliding with impossible smoothness. She couldn't see its full shape, only an outline sliding under the oily film of water. The current shifted direction, as if the creature itself controlled it. Samuel was only a few meters away, suspended, arms spread wide. His eyes weren't on her, but fixed on that shadow. He let out bubbles, whispering incomprehensible words, as if answering a secret language of the river. Lucia wanted to scream his name, but her lungs were close to bursting. A tail swept past, spinning her in the water. The touch was rough, scaly. It confirmed her worst fear. This wasn't a log, not an illusion. It was living skin, as old as the delta itself. The creature moved slowly, as if measuring its prey. Lucia caught a glimpse, a round yellow eye flashing in the darkness. It didn't blink, didn't look away. It watched her with calm, unsettling focus, as if it already knew her. Panic rose in her throat, but with it came a spark of defiance. She remembered her mother's voice that night of the flood. "Don't jump, you'll drown." She remembered her cousin's face sinking. No, not this time. She pushed forward, fighting the current. She reached for Samuel, but the massive body slid between them, cutting her off. The vibration grew stronger, beating inside her chest like a drum. Her air was gone. Her vision darkened at the edges, and her heart slammed so hard it felt like her ribs might break. Still, she kicked with the last of her strength, searching for Samuel's face through the bubbles. In a final flash, she found him. Her fingers brushed his. Just a fleeting touch, but enough to anchor her. The shadow shifted suddenly, and the water churned with turbulence. Lucia closed her eyes and followed pure instinct. She pushed Samuel upward with all the strength in her legs, as if the river itself might return him. At that same instant, the creature's tail struck her again, harder this time, shoving her to the side. The impact threw her off balance. When she opened her eyes again, all she saw was the faraway surface, a blurred circle of light unreachable. And behind her, still there, the weight of that yellow eye burning into her back. Time stretched one more second, then everything turned to darkness. The circle of light above the surface slipped farther away, like a dream out of reach. Lucia fought to find her direction, her lungs close to bursting. The current tossed her side to side, as if the river were playing with her. Then, without warning, the impact came. Something massive struck her from the side. A tail, hard as a log, slammed her against the submerged piles. Pain shot through her ribs, and the flashlight someone had thrown from above lit just enough for her to see. Among the bubbles and mud, a white flash, curved and sharp. Teeth. The jaws opened before her like a lightning strike under the water, showing a semicircle of ancient power. The creature lunged, stirring a whirlpool of mud and branches. Lucia lifted her arms by instinct, and her hands hit something metal floating close by. The portable stretcher, torn free by the wind. Without thinking, she grabbed it and shoved it between herself and the attack. The collision was brutal. The creature crashed against the aluminium frame, which shook with a dull sound. The force almost tore it from her grip, but she held on, pushing back with all her weight. The yellow eye shone again, only centimeters away, staring at her through the stretcher bars. It wasn't blind or wild. It seemed to study her. That cold calm shook her more than the teeth. Behind her, Samuel floated like a doll, dragged by the current. Lucia turned with effort, holding the stretcher as a shield in one arm and pushing him with the other. The task was nearly impossible. Her lungs screamed for air. But she knew if she failed now, he would vanish forever. The creature charged again, jaws clamping onto the stretcher. The screech echoed underwater, the frame bending under the pressure. Lucia used the push to drive herself upward, forcing Samuel toward the surface. Her hands pressed against his back, giving him the final shove. The lantern light caught his face as he broke the water, coughing. On the dock, shouts rose in the storm. "Grab him! Hurry!" Lucia saw hands reaching for Samuel, pulling him up. Relief lasted only a second, because a brutal force yanked her down again. The stretcher slipped from her grasp and vanished in the current. Water slammed into her face, forcing a bitter gulp into her lungs. She tried to scream, but only bubbles came out. The creature circled below, slow and certain, like a predator sure of its prey. Its rough back scraped against her legs, a reminder it wasn't finished. Her chest burned, her vision darkened, but she kicked toward the flickering light above. She knew Samuel had been pulled to safety, and that certainty sparked the last bit of strength in her. If she didn't survive, at least he would. The river roared again. A final swing of its tail hurled her against a pile. The blow tore a muffled cry from her and blurred her vision. With the little energy she had left, she reached one arm toward the light. Above, someone shouted her name. The water shook her from side to side, as if the river were testing her before deciding her fate. Lucia could barely make out shadows, bubbles, and the glimmer of the surface that seemed so far away. Her body screamed for oxygen, but something on her leg kept her from rising. It was like being trapped in a dream where every move grew slower than the last. Suddenly, A new beam of light cut through the darkness. Several stronger lanterns lit the shore, joined by the rough sound of engines. The patrol boats had arrived, warned by the fishermen. Their spotlights swept across the surface like knives of brightness. From above, men's figures stood against the glare, waving hooks and ropes. Lucia felt one hook's rope brush past her shoulder. She reached out desperately, but another tug from the creature dragged her down again. The contrast between the brightness above and the blackness below was unbearable. Her heart pounded in her ears so hard she thought the river could hear it. Amid the chaos, she broke the surface for just a second. Air rushed into her lungs like fire, and the spotlights blinded her. She heard voices shouting for her to grab on, saw silhouettes leaning forward with hooks extended. But she also noticed the guards' hands tense. Several held long guns, aimed at the water. The word burst from her before she could think. "Don't shoot!" Her voice echoed across the dock, raw and desperate. The sound mixed with the distant thunder. Everyone froze for a moment, stunned. The pull yanked her underwater again. This time she didn't scream. She clenched her lips, knowing that if she swallowed more river water, she wouldn't last much longer. The lantern glow became yellowish stains above her head. Below, the creature moved with terrifying calm. It didn't tear her, didn't bite her. It only kept her trapped, as if to show her who held the power. Lucia felt again that deep vibration in the water. Not noise, but presence. The yellow eye appeared before her, only meters away, watching with patience. She kicked with the little strength left, trying to send bubbles upward like signals for help. She thought of Samuel, of the fisherman, of Mrs. Velasquez who must already be safe on the far shore. And she thought of the chance she might never see any of them again. Suddenly, a hook speared the water near her, slicing down like a metallic bolt. The rope vibrated beneath the surface. Lucia brushed it with her fingertips, but the creature spun violently, and the whirlpool threw her to the side. The hook vanished in the swirl of mud and branches. Above, she faintly heard the shouts. "She's being dragged. It's taking her!" The river pulled her into a darker area, where the lanterns couldn't reach. The current grew thicker, dirtier, guiding her toward a hidden place under the dock. Her temples throbbed offbeat, and part of her mind wondered if this would be her last memory. A yellow eye watching as she disappeared into blackness. Before losing her breath completely, she opened her mouth once more. Water rushed in, bitter and freezing, but she managed to force out a muffled cry toward the surface. The same plea repeated with all her strength. "Don't shoot!" And then, the darkness swallowed her whole. The water closed over her like a liquid wall. Lucia no longer knew how long she had been under. Her lungs burned, and every second cut closer to her limit. The creature dragged her into the shadows beneath the dock, slow and unhurried, as if it enjoyed the fear. Then she saw it again. The eye. Yellow, round, fixed. Just meters from her face, framed by darkness, it watched her with inhuman calm. There was no rage in that gaze, only recognition. Lucia shivered, not from the cold, but from the feeling of being chosen, marked by something far greater than herself. Instinct screamed at her to kick, to flee, but reason told her brute force would not free her. She needed something else, something now. Then her fingers brushed against an object still strapped to her waist. The blood pressure cuff she always carried on duty. Its hose had come loose in the fall, and the strap hung free. A desperate idea struck her. Absurd, impossible. But it was that or surrender. With a sharp pull, she tore the strap free and gripped it with both hands, holding it out like a rope. The yellow eye blinked for the first time, and that gave her courage. The creature moved closer, showing the curve of its snout. In a flash of filtered lantern light, Lucia saw the scales, the teeth jutting out. A face from another time, massive, impossible. Fear hit her like a wave, but instinct was stronger. As the jaws opened, she lunged. In one swift motion, she looped the strap around the snout and pulled with all her strength, crossing the ends like a tourniquet. The mouth snapped shut, silenced by her improvised knot. The river exploded. The giant body thrashed, raising a whirlpool that spun her in circles. The strap screeched against the scales, stretched to breaking. Her muscles tore with pain, but she held on. The eye stayed locked on hers, closer now, full of a fury newly awakened. The seconds stretched like eternity. Instinct against instinct. She, with a strip of cloth and metal. It, with the whole river's strength in its body. At last, the snout jerked so violently that the strap snapped. The cuff burst into pieces that floated like silver bubbles. The beast lashed its tail, slamming Lucia against a pile and driving the air from her chest. Pain ripped through her, but so did certainty. She had won a single, precious second. The current shoved her upward, and with the last of her strength, she let it carry her. She spotted a hook's rope drifting nearby and seized it. Above, voices screamed her name. Hands pulled, dragging her toward the surface. As she rose, she turned once more. The yellow ice still lingered, staring at her through torn lilies. And in that gaze was something not quite hatred. Lucia broke the surface with a gasp that was almost a scream. She coughed river water, spat mud, and collapsed into the arms pulling her onto the dock. Air burned into her lungs, unbearable but alive. And strangest of all, so was Samuel, wrapped in blankets a few feet away, breathing weakly. The dock was filled with shouts, lights, and boots pounding on the soaked wood. The patrol men pulled on ropes while the fishermen made stretchers out of tarps. Water streamed from Lucia's hair as she tried to catch her breath, her throat burning from the river she had swallowed. Through the chaos, a new sound rose, coughing, a rough, persistent cough from the improvised stretcher. Lucia turned her head and saw him. Samuel, wrapped in blankets, convulsed with spasms, spitting out water in bursts. Every gasp was a forced return to life. His eyes opened slightly glassy, as if he didn't yet understand where he was. Relief hit Lucia, sharp and overwhelming, mixed with disbelief. All the effort, the pain in her arms, the desperation of this night. It had meaning. Samuel was alive. But she had no time to savor the victory. The river wasn't done. A roar shook the surface. Just meters from the dock, the water rose in a foamy circle. The massive body of the crocodile broke through in a furious twist, flinging lilies and branches as if they were toys. The broken strap of the blood pressure cuff still hung from its snout, glinting in the lantern light like a thread doomed to snap. The men raised their rifles at once. Some already had fingers on the trigger. "Now, shoot!" someone shouted. Lucia, still trembling, forced herself up enough to shout back. "No, lower the guns!" Her cry cut through the night, so sharp that for a moment even the rifles faltered. No one understood why she asked it, but she knew. She had seen something in that gaze underwater. Something that wasn't simple hunger. The animal shook its head violently. The improvised knot snapped apart, and the strap flew to shore. The clatter of metal onward echoed like both defeat and an uneasy pact. Then the crocodile turned, not toward them, not in attack, but toward the current that claimed it. With one last swing of its tail, it slammed the surface, raising a wall of brown water and foam. The floating lilies tore apart, leaving a green path split in two. Then, as if it had never been there, the beast vanished into the river's darkness. Silence followed. No one breathed for several seconds, as if the water might still send something back. Only Samuel's wheezing and Lucia's muffled sobs broke the stillness. At last, the patrol captain lowered his rifle with a grimace. "It's gone," he muttered, as if the river had spoken the final word. Lucia collapsed onto the planks, her body drained, her hands still marked from the strap strain. She didn't know what she had faced, a monster that chose to spare them, or an animal that decided to disappear instead of finishing the hunt. That night, the river had made its choice, to return Samuel to the shore and keep the mystery for itself. The dock lay behind them like an empty stage after a brutal act. The patrol and the fishermen carried the injured and the exhausted to the shore, where the ground had turned into a swamp of mud. Lantern beams cut through strips of falling rain, and the sound of the boat's engine faded downstream, as if the delta itself wanted to erase the witnesses. Lucia was placed on a damp blanket. The cold pierced her, not only from the water still dripping from her body. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, though she tried to hide it by gripping the blanket tightly. An assistant knelt in front of her with a clean cloth and began cleaning the scrapes on her arm, while someone else placed an oxygen tube near her face. The air burned her lungs, reminding her how close she had come to losing it. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, forcing herself not to collapse under the pain in her ribs. Each breath was a reminder. She was alive against all odds. A few meters away, Samuel lay on another improvised stretcher. His skin was ashen, his lips purple, but he was still breathing. Two men held his head while another nurse fitted an oxygen mask over his face. He coughed now and then, each spasm a painful return to the world of the living. His hands trembled too, and Lucia couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. The patrol captain paced back and forth, soaked, radio in hand. His voice was tense, sending broken reports to Central Command. Patient rescued, nurse stable, creature not located, repeat, not located. The fishermen stood silently, lanterns raised. No one dared speak too loudly, as if afraid the river might hear them. The only constant sound was the drip of water from the leaves and the hiss of the oxygen equipment. Lucia opened her eyes and looked at her hands. They were still red from the pressure of the blood pressure cuff strap. Each mark felt like proof of what had happened down there, though part of her still doubted. Had it been real? Had she truly bound a crocodile's jaws with a piece of cloth? She turned her gaze to the river, dark and impenetrable, and found no answer. The assistant pressed a cloth to her forehead. "Calm down, it's over." Lucia didn't reply. She knew it wasn't over. Not completely. They had crossed an invisible line. Something that had been only rumor, a fisherman's myth, now had weight, shape, eyes. And it had chosen to let them live. The captain stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "Tomorrow we'll need a full report. The press already smells something." Lucia nodded weakly, though she knew she wouldn't find the right words. How could she explain the calm of that yellow eye? How could she justify shouting, "Don't shoot," when everyone had expected the opposite? Samuel murmured in his sleep. Lucia caught fragments. Didn't bite, pushed, held. The men nearby exchanged uneasy looks, but no one interrupted. The wind carried a strange silence. For the first time in hours, there were no thunderclaps, no violent splashes. Only the labored breathing of the injured and the faraway murmur of the river. Lucia leaned back, resting her head on the damp ground. She looked at the sky, covered with low clouds lit now and then by distant lightning. The cold sank into her bones, but along with it came a certainty she couldn't name. They hadn't come out of the water alone. That night, on the muddy shore of the riverside hospital, everyone understood the line between legend and reality had been erased forever. Dawn arrived without asking. The sky was still covered with low clouds, but a gray light began to spread over the river, showing the traces of the night. Wet ropes, broken stretchers, puddles full of scattered footprints. Lucia hadn't closed her eyes once. She no longer needed the oxygen, but still breathed as if the air weighed more than usual. The riverside hospital, which usually woke slowly, was crowded earlier than expected. The first to arrive were not doctors or patients, but journalists. Cameras wrapped in plastic, microphones shining in the drizzle, flashes that ignored silence. The news had traveled faster than the current. Nurse fights crocodile to save patient. Lucia could barely understand how the story had spread so quickly. She hadn't even written the report the captain demanded, and already there were headlines, rumors, and exaggerated versions. Some spoke of a bloody attack, others of a giant monster haunting the delta. No one mentioned the silences, the doubts, or that she herself had begged them not to shoot. The fishermen at the hospital's entrance became sudden witnesses. One told what he had seen with arms wide, as if describing an impossible fish. Another swore he had heard the creature splashing under the dock hours before. The journalists wrote furiously, and each version grew larger than the last. The capital reacted too. The hospital phone rang without pause. Orders arrived from offices that had never set foot by the river. Reinforce security, close access to the dock, prepare a brigade to hunt the animal. The captain repeated, "Yes, sir," into the radio, his jaw tight. Lucia felt trapped in a whirlpool different from the river. She had survived something she still couldn't fully explain, and now they wanted to turn her into a headline. Every camera pointed straight into her eyes, hunting for a heroic phrase, a gesture to confirm the legend. She wanted silence, but silence doesn't sell. Samuel, meanwhile, was still hospitalized. Weak, he stirred whenever he heard the word crocodile. When a journalist tried to enter to interview him, the assistant angrily pushed him out. "He's a patient, not a show," she shouted, but no one seemed to care. The flashes lit even the hospital windows. Lucia covered her face with her hand and hid in a corner of the room. The memory of the yellow eye haunted her more than the cameras. Why hadn't it let her forget? Why was it burned into her mind like a scar? The captain approached, his face stern. "They'll ask for your statement. They want an official report." She looked at him without replying. She knew any word would be used to confirm what others had already decided. The story of the nurse who fought a monster. No one wanted to hear that, deep down, there had been something in that gaze that wasn't pure attack. Outside, the storm seemed to ease. But what was coming had nothing to do with weather. It was the noise of the outside world. Soon the whole town would talk about the event, and every version would be different. Lucia understood there was no way back. The river had marked the night with its mystery, but people would turn it into legend. And she, whether she wanted it or not, had become the protagonist. The Riverside Hospital turned into a hive only hours after the storm. The sound of boots echoed in the halls, mixed with radios pouring out orders and updates. The smell of disinfectant was replaced by reheated coffee and damp cigarettes. Officers with folders, doctors from the capital, and municipal officials filled every corner. At the entrance, an improvised board carried big letters, "Emergency Protocol." Underneath, 3 phrases repeated like a mantra: "Identify the threat, protect the population, eliminate the risk." Words that looked clear on paper, but ignored the uncertainty of what had happened. The patrol captain paced with a phone in hand, receiving instructions from the capital. Journalists had been pushed into a cordon zone, but flashes still burst behind the yellow tape. The official message was simple. A dangerous crocodile had attacked, and it had to be hunted before taking more lives. Lucia listened from a corner of the rest room, a blanket still on her shoulders. Paramedics had told her to rest, but her mind refused. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. The yellow eye, steady calm. It was not the gaze of a raging animal. There was something else, a pause, as if the river had wanted to show her something, then let her go. A doctor from the capital approached with a notebook. "We need your statement," she said in a professional tone. "The media are waiting." Lucia swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say. Should she tell them she had tied its jaws with a blood pressure cuff? Confess that instead of shouting for shots, she had cried the opposite? Admit she wasn't sure the creature had meant to kill them? All of it sounded absurd. You did the right thing, the doctor added, misreading her silence. What you did was brave. Brave, Lucia repeated in her head. The word weighed like a stone. If it had been pure bravery, she wouldn't still be doubting. It felt like they were dressing her in a hero's costume that didn't fit, pushing her into a story others had already chosen. In the next room, Samuel rested. Now and then he murmured strange phrases. Didn't bite, pushed. Wasn't trying to drown me. Doctors wrote it off as post-trauma confusion, but Lucia understood too well what he meant. In the hospital courtyard, officers spread maps of the Delta. They circled docks and planned night patrols with rifles and traps. We need to hunt it before it comes back, they repeated. For them, there was no doubt. A dangerous animal had to be destroyed. Lucia looked out the window toward the river, brown and silent under the heavy sky. A knot grew in her chest. Was it really just an animal? Or was there something else in those waters? Something no protocol could explain? Flashes lit the hallway again. Lucia covered her face with her hand, exhausted. She knew the town wanted answers, and the capital demanded results. But deep in her memory remained the image no one wanted to hear. A yellow eye that didn't show rage, but a strange calm. And with it, the unavoidable question. Had she seen a predator, or something trying to communicate? The murmur of radios and technical conversations filled the hallways. But in the intermediate care room, there was a different silence, broken only by the beep of the monitors. Samuel lay back, covered to his chest with a rough sheet. His skin still held a grayish tone, as if the river had not fully released him. Lucia entered quietly, holding a notebook she pretended to check. In truth, she only wanted to step away from the noise outside, from the voices that kept calling monster to what she had seen. The assistant stood by the bed, adjusting the oxygen. When she saw Lucia, she nodded and stepped out to give them space. For several minutes, Samuel seemed asleep. His breathing was uneven, but steady. Then his eyelids began to tremble, and his fingers shifted under the sheet. Lucia leaned in at once. "Samuel, can you hear me?" she asked softly. He opened his eyes slowly. They weren't like the night before, wild and panicked. Now they were cloudy, tired, but there was a spark of awareness in them. She thought it would take him time to speak, but the words came in broken whispers, like fragments carried by the current. "Not biting," he coughed, his chest rising fast. "Pushing." Lucia frowned. "What did you say?" He closed his eyes again, as if each syllable cost him. "Didn't want to drown me." Pause. Held my weight. The words were clumsy, but clear. A chill ran through Lucia. The phrase struck straight at her own doubts. She had seen the crocodile twist, felt its immense weight press against her. But what if it hadn't been a direct attack? What if, instead of biting, it had pushed, like Samuel said? The memory flooded her. Herself under the water, watching Samuel float, almost suspended. The river's vibration, the yellow eye fixed on hers. She had read it all as hunting. But what if it had been something else? "Samuel, are you sure?" she whispered, leaning closer. He gave a faint nod. "I felt it lift me," he gasped. "Like it offered air." Lucia covered her face with her hand. Outside, officers were planning to hunt it, while the only one who had been as close as she was said the opposite. Not an attack, but something unexplainable. As if the creature had played a strange role between predator and savior. A knock at the door startled her. It was the captain, poking his head in. "How's the patient?" Lucia answered quickly. "Resting. Still weak." The captain nodded, suspecting nothing of what she had just heard, and stepped back into the hall. Samuel had already closed his eyes again, drained by the effort of speaking. She stayed beside him for several more minutes, turning over his words. Not biting, pushing. Absurd to anyone who hadn't seen what they had. But to her, it rang like a key, a crack in the official version. The river had not only shown teeth, it had also shown a force that, for one moment, seemed to hold instead of devour. Lucia knew that silence would be easier, but she also knew the doubt would follow her like a shadow. What had happened under the water could not be reduced to a monster attack. There was something more, something she had not yet figured out. The hospital lay in half-darkness as dawn finally settled. Outside the rain had stopped, but moisture still clung to every surface. The hall smelled of wet mud, damp clothes, and stale coffee. The chaos of the earlier hours had faded. Officers rested on uncomfortable chairs, fishermen went back to their homes, and the journalists, exhausted, waited for the next announcement from the capital. Lucia, drained, entered the small nurse's changing room. The window was fogged over, blurred like a broken mirror. She switched on the yellow ceiling light, which flickered before holding steady. On a wooden bench she laid down her damp uniform, still carrying the smell of the river. She sat in front of it, studying the stains of mud, the dark scrapes, the fibers torn in the struggle. Each fold seemed to hold a fragment of the night. With a basin of warm water and a cloth, she began scrubbing the fabric. The water turned a dull brown at once, releasing that sharp odor of rotting grass and oil. The mechanical act of cleaning couldn't erase the images hammering her mind. Samuel coughing, the yellow eye, the broken strap floating like a metallic bubble. She replayed every second, wondering if she had imagined it all under the weight of lost oxygen. Then, as she emptied a pocket of her trousers, her fingers hit something hard. She frowned and reached in. She pulled out a small object, cold and rough. Under the dim light, she looked at it closely. It was a scale. It shone strangely, not like the wet skin of a normal fish. Its color was metallic, between green and gold, throwing hypnotic flashes of light. It was larger than a coin, thick and solid, as if it had resisted blows for decades. Lucia held it with both hands. Her heart jumped. There was no doubt. It had come from the creature's body. Maybe it had torn free in the clash with the stretcher, or when the blood pressure cuff broke. However it happened, it had stuck to her uniform, a silent proof of what had taken place. She lifted the scale to the fogged window. Pressing it against the glass, she turned it. The glimmer cut through the vapor, projecting a reflection that looked like a tiny eye watching her. A shiver ran down her back, but she didn't let go. She closed her fingers around it. The touch was cold, yet it carried a strange calm, as if the creature had left her a message. Not an attack, not a threat, but a sign that what had happened under the water meant something more. She looked up at the blurred mirror of the window. Dark circles under her eyes, pale skin, wet hair. She looked like someone else, a version marked by a truth no one would easily accept. The clock in the room marked 5 a.m. outside, the first sounds of a waking town mixed with rumors. Talk of hunters preparing, of prayer processions. The river, meanwhile, kept flowing, indifferent to human plans. Lucia looked once more at the scale before slipping it into the inner pocket of her clean jacket. Small compared to the size of the creature, but enough to remind her she had been centimeters away, had touched it, and that, for some reason, it had spared her. When she left the changing room, the hallway was empty and damp. Silence hung thick, broken only by the buzz of a light tube. She walked slowly, the scale burning like a secret against her chest. She didn't yet know what to do with it, but she understood one thing clearly. She couldn't show it to anyone. Not yet. The hallway's silence was cut by a sharp ring. The phone on the wall vibrated insistently, its metallic sound piercing the hospital's fragile calm. Lucia jumped and looked around. No one else was nearby. She hesitated, then lifted the receiver. "Nurse Lucia?" The captain's voice was deep, urgent. "Yes, it's me. Listen carefully," he ordered. "The weather service just confirmed what we feared. In less than 24 hours, the storm will return, stronger than the last. A bigger flood is expected across the delta." Lucia pressed the receiver to her ear. She could hear voices in the background, radios shouting warnings, maps being unfolded. The captain went on. "The order is immediate. We must evacuate the low areas of the town and close all access to the dock. No one can stay close when the river rises." Lucia nodded silently, though she knew he couldn't see her. The image of the scale still burned in her pocket, reminding her the river was more than water and wood. It was something else. "Understood," the captain insisted. "Yes, Captain. Full evacuation." "Good. I'll send men to coordinate. You talk to the staff and patients. No mistakes. This time we can't afford improvisation." The call ended with a dry click. Lucia stayed a few seconds with the receiver in her hand, listening to the dead line. A knot tightened in her stomach. She set down the phone and took a deep breath. The echo of the word evacuation stayed in her mind. She had lived through floods in childhood, but none with the weight of last night. Now it wasn't only the water threatening the town, but the invisible presence living beneath it. She walked to the ward. Some patients still slept. Others watched nervously as guards moved through the halls. The assistant stopped her, eyes tired. "What now?" "Order from the capital," Lucia answered firmly. "Storm in 24 hours. Everyone in the riverside area must be evacuated. No one goes near the dock." The assistant's eyes widened with contained fear. She didn't ask more. Outside the hospital, the first neighbors had gathered. The rumor spread like lightning. "Another storm is coming, worse than yesterday." Some whispered prayers. Others argued quietly. Children, unaware of the weight of the orders, played in puddles, splashing in streets that the water would soon erase. Lucia stepped out to the doorway. The air was heavy, thick with humidity. The sky was a gray blanket without sunlight. The river, just meters away, looked calm, but its dull surface hid a waiting force. The memory of the yellow ice struck her again. Was it still there, waiting for the flood? She slipped her hand into her jacket pocket, touching the shining scale. No one else knew it existed. It was her secret, her silent proof that there was more than the protocols admitted. But now, with the new threat coming, she wondered, should she reveal it? Would it change the capital's decisions? Or only spread panic? A group of officers unloaded supply boxes from a truck. Ropes, vests, portable radios. The captain gave quick orders. "I want clear evacuation routes. The water can cover the dirt road in hours. The dock is closed from now. No one crosses without authorization." Lucia watched him from a distance, without stepping in. She felt she had entered a game of forces far beyond her. The inevitable flood and the river's mystery she could no longer ignore. The wind began to rise, lifting damp dust. The day had barely started, but it already carried the shadow of what was to come. The news of the new storm spread faster than any official notice. By noon, the whole town was on edge. Windows filled with tense faces. Women nailing shutters shut. Men carrying furniture up to low roofs to save it from the flood. Elders watching silently as if the air reminded them of past threats. Lucia walked the muddy streets, supervising with the health team as they moved the most fragile patients to the school that would serve as a shelter. At every corner she met frightened looks, heated arguments, and whispers that ran like gusts of wind. At Petronila's house, the oldest woman in town, the mood was different. The door stood open, and a constant murmur of prayers rose from inside. Lucia paused and looked in. Petronila knelt before a table of candles, mumbling prayers while a rosary slid through her wrinkled fingers. Some neighbors copied her. "May the river not take ours," they repeated. May the monster close its eyes. Lucia felt a lump in her throat. The town had already given the river two faces, the storm as punishment and the creature as its messenger. No one argued whether it was real or a myth. After what happened at the dock, it was real to them. A few blocks on, she found another scene. A group of children huddled under an improvised awning while a teacher tried to calm them. The kids asked questions the adults couldn't answer. One, serious as if facing a real mystery, spoke up. Do monsters get cold too? Silence fell at once. The teacher faltered, unable to make up an answer. The children stared with wide eyes, waiting for a simple explanation to ease their fear. When Lucia heard the question, she shivered. The question held something deeper. A doubt about whether what lived in the river was an enemy, or a being as vulnerable as they were, trapped by the storm as well. She kept walking, the scale still in the inside pocket of her jacket. She rubbed it with her fingers while she listened to prayers, arguments, and the children's questions. It felt as if the town had split into two forces. Some sure the creature needed to be killed, others secretly hoping a miracle would save them. In the plaza, a group of men argued loudly. We have to arm up, one said. If it shows again, we'll hunt it together. And if we make it angrier? Another replied. The river doesn't forgive. Their voices mixed with the sound of hammers and boat motors as families left for higher ground. The tension was as thick as the damp that covered every wall. Lucia stopped at the school, now filled with cots and mattresses. The air there was different, a mix of fear and order. Teachers handed out blankets. Volunteers warmed pots of soup, and the weakest patients were placed in empty classrooms. Still, the river's rumble could be heard in the distance, a reminder that danger would arrive in a few hours. She looked around and realized the hardest part wouldn't be the evacuation or surviving the storm. It would be holding a town that had split in two. Those who saw the crocodile as a threat to destroy, and those who, in secret, began to think it might be a misunderstood guardian of the delta. Lucia breathed in deeply. The child's question kept echoing in her mind. Do monsters feel cold? If the answer was yes, then maybe they weren't monsters at all. If this story has caught your attention and you want to know what happens next, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification bell, and leave a thumbs up like. That way, you'll support this project and won't miss a single chapter. Let's continue. The afternoon turned heavy, as if the humid air was announcing what was coming. The sky showed electric streaks. Distant lightning lit the low clouds at times, while the river's murmur grew like a dull drum. The water at the shore was no longer clear. It had turned brown, mixed with branches and trash swept down from the delta. Ambulances were lined up outside the hospital, ready for evacuation. Their engines idled, purring like restless animals. Drivers and paramedics checked lists, adjusted vests, and filled thermoses with coffee. At the school used as a shelter, volunteers finished setting up mattresses, blankets, and makeshift first aid kits. Lucia walked with a damp notebook in her hands, going over the transport routes again and again. The order was clear. The elderly first, then the children, then those who could move on their own. The rest of the staff would split between the hospital and the school. Every line in her notebook reminded her they could not fail. This time there was no room for improvisation. The wind blew from the river, carrying a sharp smell of rotting plants. Each gust made the tree branches creak like broken bones. In the distance, horns sounded from boats still trying to move before the water covered the dirt roads. Lucia stopped beside one ambulance and rested her forehead against the cold metal of the door. She closed her eyes. A weight sat on her chest, a mix of tiredness and guilt. The memory of Samuel sinking, her desperate leap, the cuff strap breaking, the yellow eye fixed on her. Everything came back in waves. She breathed in deeply and tried to sort her thoughts. She wondered how many times in her life she had taken a deep breath before acting. But this time was different. It wasn't only about patience now. A whole town depended on every decision being carried out without mistakes. As she checked the list, she heard short laughter in the distance. Some children at the school running between stacked mattresses. That innocent laugh gave her a small break. It reminded her there was still hope, and her job was to hold that hope steady amid the chaos. A volunteer came up with a thermos. "Have some, nurse. It'll do you good." Lucia accepted, thankful. The coffee was bitter, but the warmth gave her some strength. She put the notebook in her pocket and looked up at the electric sky. The lightning seemed to split the clouds into pieces, as if the very heavens were about to open. She touched her chest, where the scale lay hidden in her jacket. She rubbed it with her fingers and thought about what it meant. For everyone, the night had been a fight against a monster. For her, it was more. An encounter she still couldn't fully understand. Maybe the next storm would not only test the town, but also the truth about what lived under the river. She took another deep breath. She couldn't erase the guilt of the past or the doubt of the present, but she could choose what to do in the coming hours. In that moment, she decided she would not let anyone else die if she could help stop it. A thunderclap made her open her eyes. The captain was giving quick orders to his team. The ambulance sirens briefly sounded to check they were ready. The town prepared to hold on, and the river waited with its brown, silent tide. Lucia exhaled slowly and said to herself, barely louder than a whisper, "This time, I'm going to forgive myself." The sky finally broke in the afternoon. The first drops were heavy, spaced, like warnings. Then came the endless curtain of rain. In minutes, the streets turned into canals, and the sound of water hammering roofs and tin drowned out every other noise. Ambulances stood ready in front of the school. But before they could leave for the first evacuations, the hospital radio burst with static. Lucia ran to the communications room, soaked to her ankles. The captain was already there, receiver pressed to his ear, eyes fixed on nothing. "Repeat, I can't hear you, repeat," he shouted, twisting the dial, trying to catch the signal. An electric buzz filled the air, broken by voices cut into pieces. What little they heard froze everyone's blood. School bus trapped, the waters pulling at children inside. Lucia felt a punch in her stomach. No doubt, the storm had come too fast and caught people off guard. The radio operator waved frantically. "Signal's weak. It's coming from the dirt road to the backwater." The captain asked for exact coordinates, but the reply was only metallic screeches. Then a broken voice. "Low point, hyacinths not holding." The rest dissolved in static. Lucia clenched her fists. In her mind she saw the old yellow bus, rusted with age, sometimes used for school trips by the river. She had seen it parked before, with patched windows and worn seats. Now that same bus was being swallowed by the river, children trapped inside. The captain turned to the room. "Launch the boats," he ordered. "We need volunteers." Patrol men rushed toward the closed dock, while fishermen stared at each other with tense faces. Some hesitated. Going out in a flood was suicide. But a father's shout broke the doubt. "My son was on that bus." Lucia felt her heartbeat pound in her temples. The memory of Samuel sinking, of her cousin lost in another flood, struck her hard. She couldn't stand still. She grabbed a portable radio and stepped to the captain. "I'm going," she said firmly. He stared in disbelief. "We need staff on land, nurse. And you'll need someone who can give first aid the moment the kids are out," she shot back without wavering. The captain hesitated, but there was no time to argue. He gave a sharp nod. Meanwhile, the radio kept spitting fragments. "Door stuck, water inside, hell." Then, absolute silence. Lucia pressed the radio to her chest. The half-broken coordinate was all they had, a low point near the hyacinths. That clue became a beacon in her mind. She knew the river gave no second chances. She stepped onto the dock under the torrential rain. Patrol spotlights lit the boats slamming against the pilings, ready to launch. Volunteers loaded ropes, hooks, and blankets. The wind howled with a whistle that sounded like wailing. Lucia climbed into one of the boats, shaking more from tension than cold. She felt the scale in her pocket, pressed against her chest, a reminder of what she had seen the night before. She closed her eyes for a second and told herself that this time they could not fail. The engine roared and the boat jerked against the short waves. The river, dark and foaming, opened before them like a giant mouth. And somewhere, beneath the floating hyacinths, an old school bus waited with its cargo of fear and hope. The sky closed in tighter, as if it wanted to crush the whole town under its weight. Rain hammered down with fury, and what only hours ago had been a dirt road to the backwater was gone. The river had swallowed it, turning it into another branch of water. Power poles had disappeared beneath the current, and the trees along the banks bent as if ready to snap. Lucia watched from the closed dock. The patrol argued over maps, trying to choose a route, but every lost minute was greater risk for the children trapped. Orders were clear. Wait for reinforcements from the capital before moving. But she knew time was not on their side. The radio's broken message still echoed in her mind. Door stuck, water inside. That voice could be the last they ever heard. She pulled her raincoat tight. Though it was useless, the rain cut through every fabric. She walked with purpose toward one of the smaller boats, where two volunteers loaded ropes and a battery lantern. One was Julian, a hardened fisherman with steady hands and an obstinate gaze. The other was Andres, a young brigade volunteer who barely hid the tremor in his hands. "Are you going to wait?" Lucia shouted over the wind. Julian shook his head. "If we wait, the kids won't make it out." Andres swallowed hard, uncertain, then finally nodded. Lucia grabbed the rope hanging from the dock and climbed aboard. The captain saw her and rushed over, soaked and furious. "Nurse, I ordered no one to leave yet." She met his eyes, holding the lantern tight against her chest. "Captain, if we don't go now, there'll be no one left to rescue." The wind stole half the words, but her tone was firm enough. The captain raised his hand to stop her, but the boat had already slipped free of its ties. Julian started the engine, and in seconds the roar of the river drowned any argument. The boat rocked violently, slammed by short, hard waves from the side. The lantern lit only a few meters ahead, showing foam and floating hyacinths smashing against the hull. The current moved like it had its own will, dragging them in zigzags as if trying to confuse them. Lucia crouched to steady the lantern and checked the wet map she carried. The coordinates were incomplete, but she knew the backwater lay beyond a bend where the river split into many arms. The problem was reaching it in time before the bus was fully submerged. Andres gripped the side of the boat, his knuckles white. His voice trembled. "What if it's already too late?" Lucia looked at him for a moment. "We won't know until we get there." His silence was enough of an answer. The engine roared, but the feeling of vulnerability was total. The river stretched endless before them, covered by rain so heavy it erased the horizon. Lightning flashed at times, showing the flood scale. Uprooted trees floating like bodies, twisted tin from some house, barrels spinning aimlessly. Lucia clutched the lantern to her chest and leaned forward, water splashing against her face. There was no turning back. She had disobeyed orders, but inside she knew it was the right choice. If the river claimed lives tonight, it would not be because they stood waiting. The scale in her pocket seemed to beat with the rhythm of the engine, as if it too wanted to move forward. Lucia closed her eyes for a second and thought of what lay ahead. The bus had to be close, and with it, the next impossible decision. The boat pushed into the current like a fragile insect in the middle of an ocean. The engine roared, but the short waves hit so hard that every advance felt like a step back. Rain fell in sharp diagonals, erasing the horizon and making the lanterns useful only for lighting the foam right ahead. At the helm, Julian kept his eyes fixed on the channel, hands steady, jaw tight. Andres crouched in the stern, hugging the coiled rope as if it alone kept him from being thrown out. Lucia, in the center, tried to hold the lantern high, but the wind swung it side to side, casting erratic beams across the water loaded with branches and twisted sheets of metal. The river seemed to have devoured everything. Pieces of houses, whole trees, floating barrels. Every strike against the hull made the boat shudder as if it might split apart. Lucia couldn't stop thinking of the children trapped in the bus. Time was a knife cutting every second. Suddenly, a different blow rang out. Not a log, not stray metal, deeper, like the impact of something alive against wood. The boat tilted, and Lucia almost lost her balance. What was that? Andres shouted, his voice breaking. Julian didn't answer. He gripped the tiller hard, his eyes darkening. The strike came again, this time from the other side, and the hull shook violently. Lucia aimed the light at the surface, and saw it. Through foam and rain, a rough back arched, like a hill rising from the water. Not wood, not wreckage, living skin, dark scarred, glistening under the beam. Lucia's heart froze. She knew it at once. The immense body she had felt under the water, the same that had turned in the dark, was now beside them. Andres screamed and grabbed for a pole to defend himself, but Lucia stopped him. No, wait! The back brushed the hull again, longer this time, more insistent. Not striking, pushing. The boat shifted meters sideways, against the will of the tiller. Julian tried to correct the course, but the force was too strong. It's steering us, he muttered, eyes locked on the river. Lucia clutched the lantern and kept the beam steady on the surface. The back rolled again and again, always on the same side, like a shepherd guiding a flock. The current seemed to help, pulling them toward a side channel thick with floating hyacinths. It wants to take us, she whispered, more to herself than to the others. Andres stared, wide-eyed. Take us? You're crazy. Look closely, Lucia pressed. It's not ramming, not biting, it's pushing. The young man shook his head, terrified. But Julian, a man of the Delta, stayed silent. He studied every move, and though he said nothing, he too saw it didn't look like an attack. The lantern swept across the surface. The back rose once more, pushing firmly against the boat, guiding it into the thick hyacinths. Amid the floating plants, steady bubbles rose, marking a fixed point. A chill ran through Lucia. She remembered the broken words on the radio. Low point, hyacinths. The creature wasn't driving them away from the target. It was leading them to it. A thunderclap tore the sky, and white light flooded the river for an instant. In that flash, they all saw it clearly. The yellow eye breaking the surface, staring straight at them. Then it sank again, leaving only the whirlpool of its passage. Lucia hugged the lantern to her chest. The fear still burned, but now it mixed with a strange certainty. Maybe the creature wasn't only a threat. Maybe it was the only compass in the storm. The boat's engine roared at full power, but the current was too strong to move straight. Julian fought the tiller, twisting it again and again, struggling against the invisible pull that wanted to drag them away. Lucia held the lantern high, its flickering light barely showing the chaos of branches, barrels, and sheets of metal rushing past them like weapons. Then, a dark shape rose beside the boat. So close Lucia could have reached out and touched it. The same yellow eye, shining through rain and foam. It glowed with its own light, fixed on her. There was no threat in it, no sign of a beast ready to attack. It was a signal, a beacon in the middle of the storm. Andres gave a strangled cry and fell back, hitting the canvas at the stern. "It's going to flip us," he stammered, pale. But Lucia stayed still. Her breathing was fast, but she didn't look away. There was something hypnotic in that eye, an impossible calm in the chaos. The crocodile didn't ram, didn't open its jaws. It only swam beside them, keeping its gaze on her, as if making sure they followed. Julian glanced sideways, his face hard under the storm. "It's not attacking us," he muttered, stunned. "It's guiding us." Behind the animal, steady bubbles rose from below. They came up in straight lines, marking a path under the mat of water hyacinths covering part of the river. They weren't random, carried by the current. They were too even, too constant. Lucia lowered the lantern and aimed it at the exact spot where they gathered. The beam lit the floating plants, swaying gently on the surface, hiding whatever was underneath. Her heart leapt. "There," she whispered. Andres stared at her, confused. "There what?" Lucia swallowed hard. "The bus." Silence fell. Only the roar of the rain filled the air. Julian pressed his lips together and turned the tiller, guiding the boat slowly toward the patch of hyacinths. The crocodile swam ahead, parallel to them, like a guardian marking the way. Lucia gripped the lantern with both hands. The water slammed the hull hard, but her eyes stayed locked on the bubbles. Each burst at the surface was like a clock, reminding them the air inside the bus was running out. The yellow eye broke the surface once more, just for a second. Then it vanished under the water, leaving a whirl that stirred the plants. As if it had said, "Here." Lucia looked at Julian and Andres. Their faces showed fear and doubt, but also the same realization she had. The animal had led them straight to the spot. The bus was down there, and the children were still trapped. The lantern shook in Lucia's hands as she lit up the spot marked by the bubbles. The river, dark and heavy, hid everything below, but she was sure. The school bus was there. Julian cut the engine, and the boat drifted, rocking like a leaf on a puddle. The silence between the three of them was heavier than the storm itself. "If it's down there, we don't have much time," Julian said, his voice rough. Lucia nodded. No protocol mattered now. Only one choice: dive. She pulled off her raincoat, staying in her soaked uniform. The cold stabbed her at once, but she didn't hesitate. She tied a rope around her waist and handed the end to Andres. "If I get lost, pull as hard as you can." The young man shook. "And if you don't make it out?" Lucia met his eyes. "Then don't let anyone else dive blind." Julian tied another rope around his chest. His rough hands didn't shake. "I'll go with you." Lucia gave him a quick, grateful look. Then she took a deep breath, tasted the storm's metal air, and jumped. The icy hit was like breaking through a wall. She sank with clumsy strokes at first, then stronger. Julian followed a few meters behind. Below, darkness pressed in, but something moved with calm, impossible grace. The yellow eye appeared for a moment, farther this time, like a living lantern in the black. Lucia understood. It wanted them to follow. So they did. They pushed against the current, guided by that strange glow. The water seemed to part around the animal's body, as if the river itself obeyed it. Through bubbles, branches, and broken metal, they followed until a long shape appeared. Lucia's lungs burned, but she widened her eyes. There it was, the bus roof. Rusted metal, once yellow, now covered in mud. Several windows smashed, and steady bubbles escaped from inside. An air pocket still held the bus up, but not for long. She swam to the roof and set her hands on the cold metal. She felt faint vibrations from inside. Taps, weak movements. The children were still alive. Julian reached her and nodded. Together they tugged the ropes to signal Andres above. The message was clear. They had found it. The crocodile circled the bus, pushing logs away with its back. Lucia saw it shove a thick branch aside with its tail. The whole river seemed to move at its command. Her lungs screamed for air. She gave one last look through a broken window. Small hands pressed against the glass inside. Her chest tightened. They couldn't fail. The rope pulled her up fast. She broke the surface and gasped. "They're there! Alive!" Thunder cracked overhead, like a cannon in the sky. The river slammed against the boat, making it creak like cardboard. On deck, Andres pulled the rope nervously, waiting for a clear signal. When Lucia broke the surface shouting "alive," the young man almost dropped the lantern into the water. There was no time to celebrate. The storm gave no pause. Lucia took another deep breath and dove again, this time carrying one end of the main rope. Julian followed close behind. The lantern's glow barely reached below, but the bus appeared like a ghostly block under the thick layer of water plants. They reached one of the broken windows. Inside, movement was clear. Small hands pressed against the glass, pounding in desperation. The children's eyes flashed white in the dark, wide open, searching for help. Lucia tied the rope tightly around the bus frame. She signaled to Julian. This would be the way out. Then she leaned close to the window and made calm gestures, pointing to her mouth, showing slow breathing, asking them to follow. The first child, no more than 8 years old, moved forward, shaking but obeying. Julian held his shoulders and guided him out. Lucia grabbed him firmly, wrapped the rope around his waist, and gave the signal tug. At once, Andres pulled from above, dragging the small body upward. Lucia watched him vanish into the froth. She turned back quickly. Another pair of terrified eyes stared at her. She repeated the same calm signs, 2 fingers to her lips, then pointing upward. The second child moved forward, driven by fading air. The maneuver repeated. Rope, not push signal. One by one, they left, like pearls saved from a necklace about to snap. Each ascent was a race against running out of oxygen, but also against the river's pull that threatened to close their path. Lucia lost count of how many times she repeated the gesture. Her body burned with exhaustion. Her lungs begged for rest, but the memory of those small hands banging on the glass kept her moving. Each child she secured to the rope felt like healing an old wound, the cousin she had lost long ago to a flood. This time, she would not fail. All the while, the crocodile circled the bus. Lucia saw it in the corner of her vision, its back arching to push away branches, its tail sweeping to block logs from smashing into the vehicle. It was impossible to deny its role. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't stalking. It was protecting. When the second-to-last child was taken up, Lucia lingered. One was left. A boy with dark hair clung to the seat, his knuckles white. He refused to let go. His eyes were wide with terror. Lucia pushed her upper body through the broken window, touched him gently, and pulled him free. She tied the rope around his waist, and though he struggled, she held firm. With one sharp tug, she gave the signal. The boy shot upward into the current. Her chest burned now. She knew she had to surface, but she looked once more around the bus. The water was cloudier, bubbles of air fewer. No time left. She kicked upward, breaking through the surface at last. Air burned her lungs like fire. And there they were, the children huddled in the boat, wrapped in blankets by Andres. Alive, every one of them. Lucia fell back into the rain-soaked river, exhausted, letting the storm cover her whole body. The children's cries mixed with the roar of the river. Some sobbed under blankets, others gasped for breath, their eyes still wide with fear. Andres held them close, trying to keep the smaller ones from slipping in the rocking boat. Lucia, panting, clung to the side, water streaming down her face, her muscles burning from the effort. Julian started the motor again, but the boat didn't move right away. The current was wilder than before, and a wrong move could flip them over. The river was mad, full of branches, planks, and debris smashing from side to side. Then they saw it again. The rough back rose beside the boat, brushing the hull. It vanished, then reappeared on the other side, lifting a log tangled in their rope. With one swing of its tail, it cleared the way. The children shrank back in fear, but Lucia raised her hand calmly. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, though her voice was lost in the storm. The animal kept circling them. Each time a large log drifted near, it pushed it aside with its body, steering danger away. The river raged, but the monster held it back just enough for the boat to keep moving forward. Suddenly, a terrible crack sounded from the shore. Lucia turned just in time to see it. A huge tree, soaked and weakened by the rain, leaning over the water. Lightning lit the sky, and in a second, the trunk crashed down like a wall, splitting the river in two. The wave it made shoved the boat sideways. The children screamed. Julian fought the wheel, and Andres grabbed two little ones before they could fall overboard. Lucia caught the lantern just before it smashed out against the side. The current shifted violently. Their plan to return was gone in an instant. The water spun into a whirlpool, dragging them toward a narrow channel full of wreckage. The hull struck something hard, and Lucia thought the boat would split apart. But then the massive body of the crocodile appeared once more. It placed itself across the current, blocking it like a living wall. Its tail beat the water with heavy strokes, changing the flow and keeping the boat steady in the chaos. It was an impossible sight, the beast acting as a barrier, holding back the river's fury so that the human line could keep moving. Julian seized the opening and turned the wheel with all his strength. The motor roared, and slowly the boat slipped out of the whirlpool, finding a steadier line. The children were pale, but alive. Lucia breathed hard, the scale burning in her pocket. She couldn't look away from the creature that, against all reason, was protecting them. The monster of rumor, the terror of fishermen, was the only reason they hadn't capsized. The fallen tree drifted downstream, dragging branches and trash with it. The current had shifted, yes, but the strange column, children, volunteers, nurse, and even the beast itself, was still moving, still pushing forward against all odds. Lucia shivered. The river hadn't beaten them. Not yet. The village lights flickered through the rain, glowing like nervous fireflies. The boat moved slowly, carrying both exhaustion and hope. The children, huddled under soaked blankets, cried quietly or breathed in ragged gasps. But they were alive. Julian kept the wheel steady. Andres held two little ones close as if they were his own brothers. And Lucia stared at the river, still unable to believe what she had seen. On the shore, the crowd was waiting. At first, silence, broken only by the wail of sirens at the school shelter. Then, when they saw the small shapes of the children, cheers exploded. Cries of relief, mothers sobbing, trembling hands clapping. The boat touched the dock, and many arms reached out to help the children off. Lucia, exhausted, barely managed to stand and guide the transfer. Each child that set foot on solid ground was welcomed like a miracle, a breath stolen back from the river. But the joy didn't last. Among the crowd stood armed men, guards, officers, and even some neighbors with hunting rifles. The lantern's glow flashed along the barrels. A gunshot cracked the air. The blast echoed over the water, and the cheers sank into fearful murmurs. Another man raised his gun, pointing at the river. There it is. It came out of the water with them. Kill it before it comes back. All eyes turned toward the current. The rough back still showed between torn lilies, moving slowly, as if confirming the rescue was finished. The yellow eye glowed once, distant but clear. Lucia felt the tension rise. The river could turn red again in a second. The barrel of a rifle lifted right in front of her. Without thinking, she stepped forward and shouted, her voice raw but firm. "Lower your weapons!" Her cry shook the dock, stopping everyone's breath for a moment. She went on, her throat burning. "Without it, we wouldn't have made it back alive." Silence thickened. The men looked at each other, uncertain. No one had expected those words from the nurse they had called a hero only hours ago. "It protected us," Lucia added, softer now but loud enough to carry. "It wasn't a monster this time. It was the difference between life and death." Some lowered their rifles slowly, hesitating. Others kept them raised, distrust clear on their faces. The patrol captain frowned, caught between the capital's order to hunt the beast and the nurse's testimony. Meanwhile, the crocodile turned in the water. With a slow, almost solemn move, it sank into the lilies and vanished without a sound. The river swallowed it as if it had never been there. The children were still in their families' arms, crying and shivering, but the danger had passed. Lucia, clothes clinging to her body and heart pounding hard, held the gaze of the armed men. She knew not everyone would believe her. Some would say she was confused, seeing only what she wanted. But she had spoken the truth, the echo of her cry. "Without it we wouldn't have made it back alive," hung in the wet night air. And for the first time, the entire village doubted what they had always believed about the monster in the river. The village woke up to a strange silence the next day. After the storm and the rescue, the streets were covered in mud, furniture floated in the ditches, and the low houses smelled of dampness and smoke. People moved slowly, as if they still couldn't believe what had happened. The families of the children never let them go. In the school, they held them close, fed them hot soup, and stroked their hair again and again, as if afraid the kids might disappear once more. Voices mixed with rumors, theories, and arguments. Some repeated that the crocodile had to be hunted at once, while others had begun to whisper that maybe it wasn't an enemy at all, but a guardian of the delta. Lucia stayed quiet, exhausted, with the scale still in her pocket. She had spent the night without sleep, listening to the wind shaking the hospital windows and replaying her own cry on the dock. "Without it, we wouldn't have made it back alive." The morning dragged on slowly until a rumor began to spread through the town. First a murmur, then a shout that sparked alarm. "At the shore! Something at the shore!" Lucia rushed out with the others toward the dock, still muddy and covered in branches. The lanterns left on since the night before lit the murky water. And then they saw it. Among the torn water lilies, the crocodile emerged. Its massive body dragged itself with effort toward the bank, leaving a trail of foam. Visible wounds crossed its back. Deep cuts, likely caused by traps or shots from those who had ignored the order to lower their weapons. The water around it turned faintly red, fading into the current. The crowd stepped back instinctively. Some raised their rifles again. But this was not an attack. The animal moved slowly, like a tired giant seeking rest. Its snout pressed into the wet mud, and the yellow eye glowed once more, this time without strength, like a lamp about to go out. Lucia stepped forward without thinking. Her heart pounded, but something in the sight pushed her ahead. This was not the beast from the first night, nor the wall that had held back the river. This was a wounded being that, against all logic, had chosen to give itself to the shore. "He's waiting," she murmured, almost to herself. The villagers looked at each other in disbelief. No one knew what to do. The patrol captain raised his hand to keep people back, but he didn't fire either. The doubt in his eyes was obvious. The crocodile stayed still, barely breathing. Air whistled through its half-open snout, each breath bubbling in the mud. Lucia noticed the broken strap of the blood pressure gauge still tangled in one of its scars, a mark from the night before. One of the rescued children, wrapped in a blanket, slipped from her mother's arms and asked in a clear voice, "Is it going to die?" Silence fell. No one could answer. Lucia felt the scale pressing against her chest. Maybe it was a message. Maybe the river was giving them a chance to see differently. She knelt slowly, moving closer to the bank. Mud stuck to her knees, and fine rain fell over her hair. She looked into the yellow eye, dim now but still watching. She saw no threat. She saw a plea. The monster was not attacking. It was waiting. The rain no longer fell with fury. It was only a steady drizzle now, soft, soaking the village gathered at the shore. Mud mixed with the river water, and the air smelled of freshly opened earth. After the chaos of the storm, the silence felt almost solemn. The crocodile lay still, its snout pressed into the wet mud. Its breathing was weak and steady, like a distant drum fading away. The yellow eye, the one that had sparked fear and questions, was still open, but with a different light, tired, resigned. The crowd watched in tension. Some men clutched their shotguns tight against their chests, unable to decide whether to raise or lower them. Mothers held their children close, protecting them instinctively, though they knew the danger had passed. The patrol captain frowned, as if waiting for an order that hadn't come from the capital. It was Lucia who took the first step. She walked toward the bank, her boots sinking into the mud. Each step pulled her farther from the crowd and closer to the massive body waiting in silence. In her chest she felt the scale, hard and cold, a reminder of everything that had happened. When she was only a meter away, she saw clearly. Tangled around its snout was a nylon net, torn but still tight, buried into the skin. Deep cuts marked where the material had bitten down, causing the wounds that now bled. Lucia crouched slowly. The animal did not move. The eye followed her, but without tension, without threat. It was as if it had come to offer itself, to surrender. "It's asking for help," she whispered. Julian, the fisherman, was the first to react. He set his weapon aside and came forward with a knife. Others followed, leaving their rifles in the mud. Bit by bit, a small group gathered around the great snout. With steady but trembling hands, they began to cut the nylon. The material was tough, tight, dug in like a shackle. Each cut freed more skin, showing old scars under the crust of mud. The animal breathed harder as the pressure eased, as if giving silent thanks. At last, the final knot gave way. The net fell into the mud like a dead snake. The crocodile stayed still a few moments longer, watching Lucia. She held its gaze, and for the first time she felt no fear, only respect. With a slow move, the animal turned. Its massive body slid back into the water. The current welcomed it gently, carrying it toward the center of the river. There were no violent splashes, no thrashing, only a calm, solemn dive until it disappeared under the lilies. The village stood in silence. No applause, no cheers, only the soft sound of rain falling on roofs and water. A little girl broke the quiet with a clear, steady voice. It wasn't a monster. The neighbors exchanged looks. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of the rifles still in their hands. Others let out long, trapped sighs. Petronila, the old woman who had prayed all night, made the sign of the cross and whispered, "The river has given us a lesson." Lucia stayed at the edge, mud up to her knees. She looked at the place where the animal had vanished and took a deep breath. The fear was still there, but now it mixed with something else, gratitude. She knew they would never see the crocodile the same way again. That night, the village had learned something. Not everything unknown is an enemy. Even the most feared force can become an ally. The river does not only take, it also protects. And under the soft rain, among mud and silence, that truth was carved forever. You've reached the end of a story where the line between fear and respect fades into the muddy waters of a flooding river. What began with a nurse who, in the middle of a storm, jumped in to save a desperate patient turned into a journey of courage, mystery, and revelations. The entire village witnessed something it will never forget. The encounter with a crocodile that looked like a monster, but turned out to be much more. Across 30 pages we followed Lucia as she fought against the current, facing not only the fury of the water, but also her own memories, guilt, and fears. We saw how Samuel was rescued in impossible circumstances, how the fisherman's rumors became real, and how the whole village was divided between faith and fear. The most powerful moment came with the second storm. When a school bus was trapped under the water, it was that same monster that guided the rescuers and protected the children until they were safe. The ending showed us that the river's force does not only destroy, it also protects. The crocodile returned wounded, giving itself to the shore, and the village learned that it was not a blind enemy, but a living part of the delta, a misunderstood guardian. This story is not only about an animal or a storm. It's about what it means to face our fears, to recognize help where we least expect it, and to learn to see things differently. Speech balloon, now I want to ask you, what would you have done in Lucia's place? Would you have trusted that yellow eye, or called for the shot? Your opinion matters. Leave it in the comments, and let's talk about this incredible story. And if this tale pulled you in, remember that your support is key to keep sharing more adventures, mysteries, and legends like this. Raising hands. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to the channel. Backhand index pointing right, turn on the bell notification bell, so you don't miss what's next. Backhand index pointing right, give it a thumbs up like if you want more complete stories full of suspense, mystery, and emotion. Thank you for staying with me until the end. The river holds many secrets, and this was only one of them.